We've been trying to fix the, quote, obesity epidemic for the last 50 years. It seems to have gotten worse. 70% of people are either overweight or obese. 50% of our children are struggling with the same weight issues. That sets us up for outcomes that are devastating. For example, those that suffer from being overweight or obese are at risk for various kinds of cancers, cardiovascular disease, Alzheimer's disease. We already know where the trajectory is going. Things like elevated levels of glucose and insulin and triglycerides, people will think, are these driven by obesity? And I would say no, these are all symptoms of unhealthy skeletal muscle first. As a physician, I've had a really unique training. I went to medical school, and then I went back and I did a postdoc in nutritional sciences and geriatrics. It was extremely eye-opening, to say the least. The opportunity was to see the interface between nutrition and aging. And I just fell in love with one of these participants. She was a mom of 3 in her mid-50s. She had struggled on this yo-yo dieting train for decades. There was this moment where I imaged her brain, and her brain looked like the beginning of an Alzheimer's brain. And it was at that moment that I realized that we didn't have an obesity problem, but what we really had was a muscle problem. And had someone told her to lift weights, do resistance training, increase her dietary protein, we would have been able to maintain her metabolic health. And at that moment, that's where muscle-centric medicine was born. When we think about aging, we think about things like Alzheimer's disease. People think about Alzheimer's disease as a brain disease solely. But really, in part, it's a metabolic disease of the brain. And where do we focus attention in terms of metabolism really is the health of skeletal muscle. When you have healthy skeletal muscle, you can manage glucose and triglycerides and all your big picture of metabolic health. But there's more. What we know from the science is that the more obese someone is, potentially the lower the brain volume somebody has. The brain is an organ that is sensitive to metabolic dysregulation. Based on the intensity and duration of your exercise, whether you are doing running or weightlifting, as you contract that muscle, it releases myokines. Myokines are little peptide hormones that travel throughout the body. They affect the brain by helping with neurogenesis. They affect the immune system. They affect metabolism in a positive way, which then leads to one more layer. There is no such thing as a healthy sedentary person. Let's imagine your muscle as a suitcase. Let's say you are traveling for 4 days. You open up the suitcase, you pack in 4 days of clothes. Now, if you are someone who is overeating, not exercising, then that's like going on a 4-day trip, but packing 30 days worth of clothes. You see elevated levels of glucose, you see elevated levels of fat. Eventually, everything is going to spill back out into the bloodstream. Essentially, you have nowhere to put the clothes or these macronutrients. Not exercising, constantly trying to pack more food into that muscle becomes unhealthy. It ends up looking like a marbled steak. Healthy skeletal muscle looks like a fillet. It is red, it is deep, it is not infiltrated with connective tissue, it is not infiltrated with fat. This change in tissue affects your ability to have good energy, good healthy mitochondria, and good strength. "50% of Americans do not exercise." Being sedentary in and of itself is already a disease state. Now, when we think about nutrition, 70% of our diet is already sugars and hydrogenated oils. The number one cause of saturated fat in the human diet is cheese on pizza, which makes tomato sauce the number one fruit. That's wild. So the food pyramid has been a pretty big disaster. 55% of the diet comes from carbohydrates. You might have 10 to 15% from protein. And we know that healthy skeletal muscle requires dietary protein. The average American eats 300 grams of carbohydrates a day. The RDA, which is the recommended dietary allowance, is 130 grams. We are at least double. Once we correct for protein, and the minimum protein amount is 0.8 grams per kg, those individuals that were on the higher protein diet lost body fat, built muscle, had lower blood pressure, better cholesterol levels, everything. And all they did was shift from the food guide pyramid to a protein-forward nutrition plan. A more optimal protein diet would be between 1.2 to 1.6 grams per kg. I know it sounds like a lot, but it only sounds like a lot because of what we've been indoctrinated to believe and think about. 100% of people have to eat. So the food part is easy, but from an overall perspective, what we see from the research is that the way to truly impact skeletal muscle health in general really comes from training. If I were to make a recommendation, I would say 2 to 3 days a week of resistance training, bands to body weight. There's no excuse, and there's also no replacement. The body was designed to move. It was designed to not be domesticated. We have to recognize that we are not training to become better at exercise, but we're training to become better at life. Going to the grocery store, picking up a gallon of milk, packing up your own car. The moment someone stops being able to do the practical will become impossible. The strongest individuals, those that are in the upper 1/3 of strength, are 2.5 times more likely to make it to 100 years old. And so as people become active, you are laying a foundation for metabolic health and strength. From a health perspective, we've really failed to look at the importance of skeletal muscle. And we think about exercise as something that we have to do versus how do we build the foundation of the house early on. Midlife, when people are beginning to think about life insurance and saving for things, midlife is your opportunity to become as strong as you possibly can before we get to a place where you just wish you could go back and do that sprint. But it's never too late to start. So this is the positive. 2 to 3 days a week, never too late to start. The way that we are going now, with 70% of adults being overweight or obese, that number is staggering. What does that mean for aging? The most impactful experience I had in medicine was during my fellowship in geriatrics. I had to face death. I had to face broken bones and pneumonia. I had to face end-of-life care that could have looked very different. Had we done a better job, then the future would not be wheelchairs, eating processed food, low muscle mass, cardiovascular disease, Alzheimer's disease collectively. Aging is coming for all of us. It doesn't have to be a negative experience. People always say to me, I don't have time. And I will say, if an individual doesn't have time for health and wellness, how do you think you are going to have time for sickness? Do you know how time-consuming being sick is? You can do a push-up. You can do a fake push-up. You can do a sit-up. You can move your body. It doesn't require a gym. It just requires discipline. We are already so sedentary that the nursing home, that way of living, is what we consider to be normal. It's normative. We have it backwards, and especially when we really think about longevity and living well, we have an opportunity now in midlife and even later on, because it's never too late, but you have to start. You have to be strong. There is a real opportunity to change the world, focusing on skeletal muscle as this organ of longevity.